few seconds, make sure we're up and running. Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a wildlife food forest garden designer, and welcome to this month's, February's forest garden live stream. First Wednesday of every month I shall be talking about something or other. I do lots of other live streams as well, but they tend to be little snippets of a couple of minutes and things of me in the garden. And then I do a workshop on the first Monday of the month as well. So the first Monday at 7 PM until 8 PM is a free beginners workshop. And today I am talking about forest garden patterns and templates, and this is an idea that has come up over the past couple of months really, and I was inspired by the National Forest Garden Scheme, NFGS. Oopsie, wrong one, hold on. NFGS, National Forest Gardening Scheme. Wow, big letters. That they have a website, they use a chat thing, and it came up about a forest garden in a box, and the idea is that you buy a forest garden kit, and it's something that you can put together. And it's difficult. It's actually really difficult, and I'll come on to this in a second. My main kind of aim behind this is to get people involved in forest gardening who wouldn't otherwise think of it, and to make it as easy as possible for them to get into it, so that show them a path in there. I have a course, a 3.5 hour course, which is called the Backyard Forest, and it's big, it's long, and it's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff to take on board. So I was thinking, is there a way of creating something kind of similar that you could just plug into and just say, I want to create a forest garden? Is there an easier way of accessing it, an easier way of getting in? So this is what it's about, and that's what it's inspired by. It is very much a work in progress. So one of the things I wanted to just to kind of talk about as part of this process, and it's a process that it's okay to be useless. This is a quote I heard, is an article I saw. I didn't actually read the article either. I just saw the headline. It's okay to be useless. I think there is far too much emphasis placed upon being productive and being efficient, and there's not enough emphasis placed on being useless and messing about. And I think, that you create, when you create something beautiful and you create something useful, it's so much better when it comes from a place of play, and it comes from a general curiosity, genuine curiosity, and a genuine kind of desire to find out. And I think it's a very good thing to say it's okay to be useless. It's okay to make something that doesn't work. That's fine. It's this kind of striving for perfection and striving for utility. But there's an awful lot, you could talk about that an awful lot in different kind of social terms and societies, prism, neoliberal, classical, neoliberalism basically, and the kind of pursuit of profit and the pursuit of money and what people want. So anyway, that's my kind of opening gambit. It's okay to be useless. And the other thing is that human beings we're all works in progress. We're all kind of constantly learning, and it is, again, it's a process. It's a state. Living is like being alive. And you're always learning, and you're always doing and creating things. And I think this is the way it should be. This is the way that you should be progressing. You should be learning, and to kind of once you stop, then that's it. You kind of stop living. So it's a good thing that we're works in progress, because there's always constantly improving, and it's not like it's a problem that there isn't like an end product in sight. I think much better to explore and to change and to adapt. Anyway, in the kind of broader context of the climate and ecological emergency, I think this is actually very useful as well. Anyway, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they are finished. And yeah. So today, what I wanted to talk about was the kind of project. I think I've called it Food Forest Patterns, and the ideas behind the project and where you can find out more information. There isn't much there. This is the kind of soft launch, as they say, of the idea of it, and I don't know what will come of it. I don't know whether it will just fizzle out and nothing will happen, or whether it'll be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll add something to it and other people get involved. So we'll see what happens with it. I'm not making any promises. I thought it might be kind of an interesting kind of little project to do, because I'm doing an awful lot of design work at the moment. So we'll see how it works out. What there is, what I meant to say as well, if you hit the P button, you get on your keyboard with a slideshow. The slideshow is always available at natureworks.org.uk/talks/patterns, and you can view that on your website right this moment. But if you hit the P key on your keyboard, it will bring up all the notes. And I just wanted to say that because this is Design from Patterns to Details is one of David Holmgren's, who's one of the co-founders of permaculture. It's one of his principles, and it's kind of interesting about the idea. And I do find like a lot of things in permaculture are because I used to study, I used to work as a web designer. A lot of the things you did people were doing anyway. It's almost like it's in terms of design, the design process. It's practices that have been around for centuries. So, but it's interesting that they've been highlighted, and design from patterns to details is the thing that the kind of principle that I'm interested in. And I kind of came to this afterwards. Now look, I'll show you where the files are kept. There is a repository online with all the files on. When I get round to it, I will create a website for it as well, so you can download stuff from there and see things on there, which is quite that's an idea I hadn't thought of before. And yes, and then I'll look at the purpose, what the function of, what the whole idea behind the project is. Look at the design problem, quote unquote, and then have a quick look at some examples. Okay, so file repository. It is here, github.com/growdigital/patterns. If you don't know what GitHub is, don't worry about it. It's a software. It's a repository. It's a place to put files, and normally it's used for programming, but it can be used for anything. So anywhere you have files, this is actually a place that you can store them. And I think it's kind of really important for this particular project is that it's the kind of key kind of idea behind it is to provide inspiration. And I think it's really, really important to give people sketches to kind of open it up to a wider audience as possible. I mean, I do an awful lot of work in CAD, and CAD files are really, they're just really, really difficult. Let me see if I can just quickly get one up. Notes. Do I have any CAD files to hand? Oh, come on. Oh, it's going to be slow, isn't it? Don't think. Oh, I haven't got any. No. I thought I had some CAD files. And it doesn't matter, but the CAD files are really, they're quite technical, and they look technical, and they can be really off-putting. It's a good way of sharing and storing information for people who know how to use CAD and who know how to read a plan. But for mere mortals, sketches are a much better idea, because you can see the plants, you can see the ideas, and you can visualize it far more easily. So I think a combination is good. So for people who are garden designers, or use CAD, then have CAD files, and for everybody else, have some illustrations. So combine. I want to combine them. So for different examples, have sketches and have CAD plans as well. So it's really, really important to make it accessible. This is the whole kind of purpose. The whole point of it is to make it accessible. So if you go to github.com/Grow Digital. Grow Digital is my old web design moniker name, and then there's a repository, a place where all the files are stored, and that's called Patterns. And I think it's kind of interesting is that I will be I will create a website for each of the examples, and that's kind of and I can use the same files that I'm sharing here. So here's the website, and here's a list of the files basically in the repository. So vague idea, create a the vague idea is to create different folders based on different size gardens. So you've got show gardens, and then have specific examples. But I'll come on to that in a second. Okay. So onto the purpose. The whole point of this, as I was saying, is to have a set of templates that people who don't know much about forest gardening can say, I want a forest garden, what can I have? And then they look at the template gardens, and it's presented there for them, that they can actually see, this is a sketch taken from the application form for one of the show gardens. But you can actually see the space, and you can see I'll add trees, and we'll add shrubs and ground cover plants and climbers, and you go, right, that's what I want, and then they can just kind of take it and then plant it. Idea being that you have, on the one hand, you have the patterns, which are the trees. So this example here, and then you have the small trees or shrubs. Then you have herbaceous perennials, and then you've got ground cover. This is a kind of sketch of forest garden layers. That's a kind of basic pattern, but then you get into the specifics as well. So then you'd have, this is it's a 4 meter cherry tree on a colt rootstock, and and then give a link to the specific variety that it is. So then give specific examples of specific species. So you have a pattern, which is tree, shrub, ground cover, and then you have the specific species. Cherry, black cherry, barberry shrub, comfrey, herbaceous perennial, strawberry ground cover, whatever it is. So that's the kind of idea. And you present different size gardens as well. I think this is really, really important too, that you have a different size garden because people have got different size gardens. Not everybody has. We've got 2 1 acre forest gardens in progress. Well, kind of 3, and that not everyone has that space. It's a luxury, and it's very different. So I think you open it up again by showing people who have small spaces that you can create a forest garden. Here's a pattern, the general kind of shape, the general design of it. Here's specific species that you could use, but please go and look at other ones as well. Yeah, that's the idea. Amongst that, I really think it's worthwhile looking at the philosophy of forest gardening too, and I won't go into it now because it's a 10-minute thing in its own right. But the idea that it is an edible ecosystem, a sustainable, self-sustaining garden that sits in the landscape, that you don't have to requires minimal inputs, but sits within a broader landscape as well. So edible ecosystem philosophy of forest gardening. And then also look at the principles of garden design, because there are a few principles when I think it's worth possibly this is what I'm kind of toying with. There are a few principles of garden design that they're quite simple, really. Like the stuff that I do, it's not rocket science. I used to work at CompuServe, which is one of the first internet companies back in 1999, I think it was, and there was a guy there building web pages, and it's and he had a sign up on the wall, and he said it's not effing rocket science, and I thought it was hilarious because HTML, if anyone who knows HTML for building websites, it's not rocket science. It's not complicated, but it is at the same time. But it's not rocket science, you know. It's not like a high level maths or anything. And I think it's the same with garden design. It's not rocket science, yeah. You want to put the right plant in the right place. And the main constraints on that are your climate and your the aspect of your garden, where the sun's coming from, and the soil that you have, yeah. So those are kind of three of the key things. And if you can put that in here, and then this is what people can be aware of, and you say these are the principles, list them with an example. So when you're looking at the patterns and you want to shift things around, then you've got some principles to work to as well. So really, really simple, keeping it really, really simple. And I was saying before, the patterns, so that's to put the philosophy and the principles, philosophy of forest gardening and the principles of garden design in there. And then look at the patterns of planting combinations. So this is, I'll show you an example in a minute, but this is this illustration here is an example of the patterns: tree, shrub, herbaceous perennial, ground cover. Yeah, that's a pattern, and a species would be cherry, barberry, comfrey, wild strawberry, whatever. So those are the specific species. And then it's up to people to adapt those patterns to their own particular situation. So basically it becomes forest gardening by numbers. So you give someone a kind of kit and they can kind of colour it in and then put in the colours that they want for their particular location. So that's, yeah, kind of the idea. Hold on a second, did I? Oh, there it is. Good. I've got some notes here. Plug and play. That's another phrase if you get from computing, but just be able to put something in and fiddle it around. Now, I kind of just wanted to look at touch upon the design problem, quote unquote, but the problem is not really a problem. It's what design is. And again, I didn't realise it's like years ago. I read some David Holmgren's book or came across some articles or something. But the problem is a solution or something. Is one of the kind of principles, David Holmgren's principles. But it's not design. It's not a design problem because this is what design is. There is this. Oh, I should put this at the bottom. You have design elements and you have design parameters. So you've got the things that constrain, not really constrain, but the things that are the edges of the project, the garden. So that will be where it is, what the soil's like, but also what your budget is, how much time you've got, how much you know, who you know in the area. There's lots of parameters around a garden. It's quite funny how really all that you're doing is you're putting plants in the ground and they're growing. There's an awful lot else to consider around that. And there are a lot of variables. And I think this is the kind of key thing. I kind of say, okay, you got a windbreak, and I'll come onto this in the example. Tallest plants go at the north side of the garden as a general kind of idea. Then they don't shade out your garden. They might shade out somebody else's garden. That's another matter. But your garden, they don't shade out, and that's a principle, a kind of general idea in garden design. And then you have kind of less valuable sunlight in the east, and you want to have smallest kind of windbreaks in the south and the west, because that's more valuable sunlight, that's more of it. So but there are an awful lot of other variables at play. It's not just the size, there's a lot of other things to consider as well in that mix. The existing plants, your neighbours, any other kind of features, what you're doing with the garden, what you want the garden to be, how you're going to use it, who's in your family. There's just all these other things that have an effect and have an influence upon that simple decision, upon that simple idea. And I think what happens, I think it's the commodification of everything in modern society. The idea is to flatten absolutely everything and make it as consistent as possible, so that it's easier to manage for the aim of making a profit. Okay, so this is the idea of variety versus consistency. So any industrial process that you have where you are creating a product, you want that process to be as consistent, as uniform as possible. And this is what happens with the agriculture as an industry. This is what happens. You end up with a giant field. This is a field of potatoes. I've taken this straight from Wikipedia. You end up with a giant field of potatoes that has, there's more biodiversity in that tree there than there is in this entire field. Yeah, but that's the problem, is that you have industrial agriculture leads to monocultures. That's what it does. That's the kind of idea. This is artisan versus the industrial. So I keep coming back to, in kind of thinking about this, the arts and crafts movement, William Morris arts and crafts movement, and there's the affordable, the creation of the product, and there's artisan, which is custom made and takes time and costs money, and then there's the industrial, the affordable for the poor people who can't afford William Morris wallpaper, and they get their wallpaper from I don't know, cheap places to get wallpaper from, wherever they may be. So you have this kind of tension between the artisan and the industrial. And also I think it's the idea of education and automation as well, that you have individuals who are learning, and like learning about garden design has actually been really, really interesting. For me, it's been really, really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned how to use CAD. I've learned about wildflowers. I've learned about forest garden plants. I've learned about how to use spreadsheets. I've learned how to create different types of website. There's all these skills in the mix. I've learned how to do live streaming. And I've learned a vast amount in a very kind of relatively short amount of time. But if you want to create, you're creating a product which is food, then that you require, you want to make it as simple as possible. And you want the whole process of automation is to remove the human element. The whole process of automation is to get a machine to be able to do it. And it's it's kind of interesting, this conflict. I don't know, conflict. There's tension. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of there, and it's kind of at the heart of this. Better, I think, to educate people and to kind of draw people in and give people skills, than to say to separate them. You want to engage people with nature. You want to engage people with physical space, with outside, and that's the kind of aim of it, whatever that might be. So kind of going back to the it's okay to be useless. This is an idea of the opposite of useless is useful, and that is a loaded term in political and economic terms. The idea of productivity and efficiency, but it's a very one-dimensional efficiency. It doesn't do anybody any good in the long run. But there we go. Anyway, so that's the kind of background to it. And then let's move swiftly on to the examples themselves. So going on to the examples, I just wanted to kind of talk about the couple of examples. Firstly is the patterns. So again, I just don't know how useful. I don't really know how, without doing it, I don't know how useful this is going to be. But I'm going to give it a go. So I've just got a very, very simple example here. This is a 60 meter by 60 meter square. Well, it's not. It's a piece of paper with dots on. But imagine this is a 60 meter by 60 meter square, which is roughly a 1 acre, and it's a 1 acre field. And as I was saying before, you've got kind of key garden design principles, which is one of them is aspect. So you say aspect 12. This is the northern boundary along here. This is the eastern boundary, southern boundary, western boundary. And along the northern boundary, you want ideally about a 12-meter evergreen hedge. And you want evergreen because, and again, this is the variety and the variability, and depends where you are in the world. But here in the kind of west of the UK, the predominant winds are southwesterly most of the year, and the kind of northeasterly in the summer, in the winter rather. So you kind of want to have evergreen hedges if you can on the north boundary, because that's where you get more of the winds in the winter, and you want them evergreen so they protect more in the winter as well. So you say, okay, this as a vague idea, 12-meter evergreen hedge, but then that will cast a shadow on the land behind it. That's another thing to consider. That's another variable in the mix. Then on the eastern side, it's not as sunny. The sun that you get from the east is not as valuable as the sun you get from the west, generally speaking, because the sun from the east hasn't had time to warm up, whereas the sun from the west the air is warmer, which means that the plants generally photosynthesize more with the afternoon sun, with the westerly sun, than they do with the morning sun. So you say, oh, well, okay, we'll have evergreen, plus the wind's coming from the northeast, so we'll have an evergreen 5-meter evergreen hedge down there. Cool. And then you say, westerly, we'll have a 5-meter hedge. I was just looking, this is just like an example, possibly shorter on the westerly side, and then a 3-meter hedge, deciduous hedge, on the southerly side. So that's the pattern. That's the kind of general idea about having windbreak hedges. And then if you look at the specific, native where possible. Again, this is another variable that comes in. If you're creating an edible ecosystem, you want to include as many native plants as possible in that forest garden, because you want to support as diverse a range of insects and encourage insects as plant for insects where possible, because insects are the foundation of the food web. Well, plants are the foundation of the food web, but those insects eat the plants, and everything else eats the insects, and everything else eats them. So native plants where possible, because they have co-evolved with local native wildlife. So the next bit, the species, really, this really depends where you are in the world. Here in West Wales, these species, well, most of these species are about the place. So 12-meter evergreen, I would say, right then, holly at the back, have a 2-meter thick hedge if you can, 2 double thickness hedge, windbreak hedge, have a 12-meter holly at the back, because that will 12-meter holly at the front, and then you could have a Bowls willow at the back. Bowls willow grows about 1 meter or so a year, so will grow very quickly and will provide shelter at the back, and then the holly will thicken up the hedge and provide evergreen, but they grow much slower. Generally, evergreens grow much slower than deciduous plants. So that's, as an example, you would have bowls at the back and holly at the front, bowls willow at the back, holly at the front, and that's your northern boundary, and that's the species. Evergreen on the east, 5-meter evergreen, Elaeagnus abingii, silverberry is a possible non-native, but it's a good 5-meter high evergreen hedge. Guelder rose on the west is a native species and deciduous. And then along the southerly boundary, you would say, okay, we're going to have a 3-meter high dogwood, native dogwood, Cornus sanguinea hedge there, and it's one of my favourite plants to use for windbreak, because it's kind of much easier to it's very easy to manage, because it's not got thorns on it and grows in I like the way that it grows. But then so those are the species. So this is the kind of the general idea of it. Okay, so that's the species. We've done that, cool. And then the other kind of stuff that I wanted to talk about was the show garden. So it's not just, so there's specific gardens. So you say, oh, I've got a 1-acre field. What kind of patterns could I use, and what kind of species could I use? That's one thing. And then you want to say, for a show garden, the show garden can be is useful for two respects. Firstly, it's because it's you want to encourage people who are creating show gardens, horticultural show gardens. You want to encourage them to put forest gardens in, food forests, edible landscapes, whatever you want to call them, to promote the idea of edible ecosystems. If you're going to plant a garden, plant bloody edibles. Yep, there's no reason not to. You can and plant natives and edibles. That's what we should be promoting just across the board in horticulture. And show gardens are a very good way of doing that. See, the more show gardens you get out, then the more you get the word out. And this is if you can give somebody a template for a show garden, then they can create their own from that and get ideas from that. This is a planet-friendly garden. It's a BBC local radio and RHS. Oh, I can't remember which show it is. Anyway, and it's a show garden competition, 4 meters by 6 meters. You're designing to a brief, and it's kind of, I think show gardens are just like the antithesis, of, they're not like forest gardens. Forest gardens are about your location, your situation, specific to where you are, whereas a show garden is very much, it's a stage set. It's a very, very different process, and it's a very, very different thing. Anyway, it's still useful to get ideas out, and I think just be aware of that. So anyone who wants to create a show garden, give me a shout, and I can always help you out with the design aspect of it. So that's the other kind. So small gardens, show gardens, large gardens. These are just some of the examples that I'd like to look at creating templates, patterns and templates and species for. And then Megamillion combinations. Now the kind of key thing, this is a design problem, but it's not really a problem, is there are lots and lots of different combinations. So for example, I've created a forest garden spreadsheet for Martin Crawford's book, which I've got up there, along with Ollie and Chris, Ollie Boone and Chris Day, and there are 453 plants listed. All the information from Plants for a Future. 453 plants, and say, I've got a garden, medium-sized garden, and I want to put 50 different plants in there. So, a range of fruit trees and perennial veg and some couple of shrubs and some climbers and some windbreaks. So yeah, 50 plants. It's not like there are, in terms of combinations, there are that many. Megamillions. There's just like a vast number of combinations. Out of those 453 plants, I want to choose 50, and this is a combination of plants that I can have from that. So you can see it's a vast number, and this is the idea of variety and variability. There are so many variables involved, and I'm wondering, how useful will you just end up with a massive, great big list of different possible combinations of plants for plants that work well together? You end up with a huge, great list, and just people, you might as well look at a spreadsheet, or where is the use in it? What's the value in it? Because you can show people a couple of things and they go, oh, that's nice, I like that, but there's just all these other possibilities to consider. So yeah, I'm worried that it'd become a massive, great big bloated project if people do start contributing to it, and I go, well, I don't think that's a very nice combination, but who am I to filter out the stuff that I don't like and shouldn't be in there? What criteria should be in there for combinations of plants? So yeah, it's a kind of interesting, kind of tricky thing. You've got to think back to the whole kind of point of it, the whole purpose of it, which is to say, here's some patterns, which are we're not talking about species, and here are some species that you could use in those particular patterns. Might be a way of doing it, to say half a dozen ideas for different species for each of those patterns. Yeah, I'll have a think. This is work in progress. Anyway, so I thought I'd better end up on. Here we go. Better end up on the ground ivy and rhubarb. Just as this is what we've got growing here. Ground ivy. I love ground ivy. It does kind of get quite tall. It goes to about 30 centimeters, but it works well with rhubarb. Rhubarb has massive, great big leaves, and it kind of shades out the ground ivy, stops it competing so much. And ground ivy is nice and easy to move around. It has a very shallow root system too. So that's one example. There's an apple tree here, and you can just see over here. I've got one. There's a gooseberry bush over on this side. So yeah, ground ivy as a ground cover works really well. And then like companion plant combinations of plants. I love this photograph, and it's yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and marigold, Calendula officinalis, and it's just a really beautiful. I think it worked beautifully together. But this is just as one kind of like just two examples that you have. Anyway, so that's where we're at. So yeah, food forest patterns is go. Thank you very much for watching. A big thank you also to all the people in the National Forest Gardening Scheme who have contributed. Joe Barker, Thomas Ramiaz, Ramiaz. Sorry for getting your name wrong, Thomas. And other people whose names I should have written down and have forgotten. But thank you very much for all your contributions. I really, really appreciate it as well. And I will be doing more on this. And if you do want, I will kind of, I'll keep publishing it. I'll keep kind of putting stuff out there about the project, because I think it does have legs. Anyway, if you're interested, get hold of me. hello@natureworks.org.uk. You can email me if you're interested in helping out at all. And I'm on all the social media networks. So, whoa, let's go. Thank you very much for watching. There is a Zoom chat. I shall catch up with you there, which has been in the newsletter. Thank you very much for watching, and catch you again.